In this lecture, we will be going over the determination of gender, both from a genetic and hormonal standpoint during embryological and lifespan development. Sex is determined chromosomally. What this means is that it is almost entirely genetic, and of the 23 haploid chromosomes that we receive during fertilization from both our mother and our father, the chromosome that we are primarily concerned with is the X or Y chromosome for male and female respectively. Now, the first major breakthrough in understanding sex determination was the discovery of sex chromosomes in the early 1900s. Although most chromosomes were present in equal numbers in both male and females, there were two additional chromosomes that were unequally represented in the two sexes, the X and Y, as we see down here respectively in this image. Now, in this slide, we see the 23 pairs that we discussed in the previous slide that we received from our mother and father, our parent haploid cells. In the female, we have two X. In the male, we have X and Y. Now, this is important because depending on which type of sperm actually fertilizes the egg will determine the sex of the offspring. So we have the heterogametic sex and the homogametic sex, and all this really means is the types of gametes that these parents or offspring may carry. Heterogametic meaning two different X and Y, and homogametic meaning XX. Now, in this slide, we're going to go into the gene expression as far as embryological development is concerned. So, the SRY gene is only expressed in males and activates the testis-forming pathway at about 7 weeks into development. And before this happens, we actually have an undifferentiated sexual organ. So we have here, we can see both the Mullerian duct and Wolffian duct, and after about 7 weeks, the SRY gene will activate this testis-forming pathway and cause this undifferentiated sexual organ to then differentiate into either the male testes or the female ovaries. So, in this next slide, we will discuss the hormonal activation of sexual differentiation. Now, males, as we talked about, have the SRY gene, and the product of this gene stimulates the indifferent gonad to develop into testes. And these testes begin producing two hormones. We have testosterone and its associated dihydrotestosterone, as well as the anti-Mullerian hormone. And in the female, at the moment during this stage of life cycle, we have only estrogen being produced. So in this image down here on the bottom right, we can see that at 7 weeks, it's completely undifferentiated. There's large in part there's all of the same organ systems right here. We have what would be the tail if we were a lesser developed mammal. We have the anus and the urethral groove, and there's not really much going on here until this SRY gene activates the testis-forming pathway. And so then we start to see it takes this split. We have male down here where we start to see a development of the glands of the penis, and furthermore, the opening of the urethra is actually up towards the glands at the head of the penis. And whereas in the female side of things, we do have the glans clitoris, and the urethral folds form a little bit lower. And as we see at birth, we then start to see the formation of the labia majora and minora, as well as the clitoris is much smaller, and you can see that very clearly in this image. Now we'll move into the secondary hormonal influences, and so it's very different with males and females. As far as males, there's not as many hormones involved in sexual reproduction as there are for females. So to begin, we'll start with the follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH. This stimulates the maturation of sperm cells. Then we have luteinizing hormone, which is involved in the production of sex hormones or androgens by the interstitial cells of the testes, and therefore is also called interstitial cell-stimulating hormone. And finally, we know we've already talked about testosterone as a driving force in the male reproductive system. And testosterone promotes the production of sperm and secondary sex characteristics that are more masculine, such as the Adam's apple or protruding brow and things of that nature. So over here in our diagram, we can see these negative and positive feedback loops involved in the hormonal systems coming from the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So now we will move on to the females side of things. And with the females, we have clearly, you can see as compared to this previous slide with the males, there's only 3 in the male slide. On the female side of things, there's 5, 6, there's probably, we could say 8 major players in the female hormonal system as far as sexual reproduction is concerned. So again, we see follicle-stimulating hormone being a major player in the female reproductive system, and FSH stimulates the development of egg cells known as ova, which then develop in the structures called follicles in the ovaries down here, as we can see, which were the differentiated Mullerian ducts. Then we have luteinizing hormone, and luteinizing hormone also plays a role in the development of ova, and it actually inducts ovulation and the stimulation of estradiol and progesterone produced by the ovaries. So, leading into our next pair of hormones, estradiol and progesterone. Now, you see they're associated with each other, and this is because estradiol and progesterone are steroid hormones that prepare the body for pregnancy. Estradiol produces secondary sex characteristics in females, while both estradiol and progesterone both regulate the menstrual cycle. Prolactin is another important hormone in the female reproductive system, and this is the hormone that stimulates the production of milk by the mammary glands following childbirth, and is associated with the regulatory hormones, both prolactin-releasing hormone and prolactin-inhibiting hormone. Now, these hormones are very self-explanatory and are involved in the negative feedback loop surrounding this hormone, prolactin. Now, oxytocin is a very important hormone when it comes to the female sexual reproductive system. It is released by the posterior pituitary and stimulates uterine contractions during childbirth. Contractions start to increase in the intensity as blood levels of oxytocin rise via a positive feedback mechanism until childbirth is complete. Also, oxytocin stimulates the contraction of myoepithelial cells around the milk-producing mammary glands. So not only do we see this action down here at the uterus, but we also see action at the mammary glands. And this occurs, so as cells contract, these myoepithelial cells, as they contract, the milk is forced from the secretory alveoli into the milk ducts and is ejected from the breasts in milk ejection, or better known as the letdown reflex. Now, an important thing to note is that the release of oxytocin is stimulated, specifically in breastfeeding, is stimulated by the suckling of an infant, which triggers the synthesis of oxytocin in the hypothalamus and is released into circulation at the posterior pituitary. Now, when this happens, now we know that oxytocin plays a role in childbirth as far as the contraction of the uterus. And we also know that it plays a role in the milk production and secretion in the mammary glands of the female. And this plays a very important role in the mother-child bonding which occurs. And this is why, when right after childbirth, they will take the infant, the newborn, and clip the umbilical cord and wipe it off, and then immediately hand it to the mother. And this is how that initial bonding can form, and that this child will then know the true strength of the bond with its mother. So that's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed.